This episode contains mature themes, including topics of obsession, betrayal, and violent acts, which some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
And it's, again, I don't know that there's words to describe it, so, take care of your kids.
And we just want justice to be done.
Matter if she's not looking forward to the Easter Bunny coming in a couple weeks, or that she'll never tell her family she loves them.
I love all kids. Nobody should have to go through that.
A mother should never have to wake up in the middle of the night and question if her baby is safe. She should never have to search in the dark, panic creeping up her spine, only to find that the very person she trusted, the one she loved, had done something so unspeakable that the world would struggle to comprehend it.
I don't know how I could deny it if I don't remember. I wouldn't feel comfortable denying it,
But on the early morning of October 3, 2016, Amanda Adkins did. She was a mother of 4, exhausted from another long day of raising her children, just trying to give them a better life. She had no reason to believe that when she closed her eyes that night, everything would change. That when she woke up, she would no longer be just a mother, she would be the woman who found her baby girl in a nightmare she could never escape from. We hear about horror stories. We read about them in the news. A tragic case. A life lost too soon. But we never truly think about what it means. What it means to walk into a darkened basement and see something so wrong that your brain refuses to accept it. What it means to reach out for your child and realize she's not warm. What it means to hear the words coming from your own mouth. What did you do? And know, deep down, that no answer could ever make it right. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about trust, shattered in the most violent way. It's about a mother who wanted love and safety for her family and unknowingly let a monster walk through the front door. This is the story of Emmaleigh Barringer. And I need you to listen, because what happened to her should never happen to another child again. Amanda Adkins had always dreamed of a safe, happy life for her children. She wanted them to grow up without fear, without the struggles she had faced. So when she packed up and left Maryland, leaving behind the noise, the chaos, and the uncertainty, she believed she was making the best decision for her family. And at first, it seemed like she was right. Her children adjusted quickly to their new surroundings. The fresh air, the open space, it felt different from the life they had known before. It felt hopeful. And at the center of it all was her baby girl, Emmaleigh Barringer. Emmaleigh was special from the very beginning. She came into the world earlier than expected, 8 weeks too soon, fighting to breathe, fighting to survive. But despite her fragile start, she was strong. She was resilient. Amanda called her a warrior. She was the kind of baby who seemed to know she was loved. She didn't cry often, just watched the world around her with wide, curious eyes, her tiny fingers reaching for the faces of the people who adored her. Her siblings were obsessed with her, always hovering, always making sure their little sister was happy. And Emmaleigh was happy. Her smile could light up an entire room. A gummy, joyful grin that made even the hardest days feel a little easier. She was the kind of baby who radiated warmth, who made people believe in something pure and good. At just 10 months old, she was already showing glimpses of the little girl she was becoming, babbling her first words, wobbling on chubby legs as she tried to take her first steps. Everything about her was full of life. Amanda would watch her and feel this overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was why she had left Maryland. This was the fresh start she had wanted. A new home, a new life, a new beginning. And then she met him. His name was Benjamin Taylor, but everyone called him Benji. To the outside world, he was charming, easygoing, and affectionate. He had a way of making people feel at ease, like he was someone you could trust. When he smiled, it seemed genuine. When he spoke, his words were smooth, effortless, like someone who had nothing to hide. And for Amanda Adkins, a single mother of 4, it felt like finally, she had found the right man. From the moment they met, Benji was attentive. He listened when she talked. He made her laugh. He went out of his way to show that he cared, not just about her, but about her children. He wasn't just dating Amanda. He was embedding himself into her life. It didn't take long for Amanda to fall for him. At first, it was the little things. He would pick up groceries without being asked. He would play with her kids in the yard, making them giggle until their stomachs hurt. He would wrap his arms around her at night, whispering how much he loved her, how much he wanted a future together. To Amanda, it was a dream. She had struggled before, raising her kids on her own, making ends meet, trying to create a stable life after leaving Maryland. But here was Benji, slipping into their lives as if he had always belonged. By August 2016, their relationship was public. He posted a picture of them kissing on Facebook, a moment frozen in time, a symbol of what Amanda thought was real love. A month later, he changed his status. In a relationship with Amanda Adkins, it seemed like a simple update, a routine declaration of love on social media. But to Amanda, it meant something deeper. He was proud to be with her. He wanted the world to know. And that meant everything. But love can be blinding. What Amanda didn't know was that the man she adored, the man who had so seamlessly become a part of her world, was not who he appeared to be. Benji had a past, one he had carefully concealed. A criminal record, burglary, parole violations, a history of disregarding the law. Yet, somehow, he had managed to paint himself as the perfect boyfriend. A man who, on the surface, seemed dedicated, loving, safe. By the time Amanda found out who he really was, it would be too late. Benji had already become too close. He was in her home, in her children's lives, woven into their daily routines. And soon, he would shatter their world forever. Welcome to Crime of Passion. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime of passion stories updates. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a long day when exhaustion settles over a home like a soft blanket. Amanda had put her children to bed early that night, tucking each one in with a kiss, smoothing their hair, whispering goodnight. Little Emmaleigh, barely 10 months old, had been the last to settle. She wasn't fussy, she almost never was. She had a way of drifting off to sleep peacefully, as if she trusted the world completely. Amanda had no reason to believe this night would be any different from all the others. By 9 p.m., she was in bed, the house wrapped in stillness. But Benji? He wasn't tired. He stayed up, moving around the house, checking his phone, thinking. And Emmaleigh, wide-eyed, playful, was still awake. What happened next can never fully be understood. Sometime between midnight and the early hours of the morning, Benji took Emmaleigh downstairs. At first, it seemed harmless. Maybe he was just letting Amanda sleep. Maybe he was finishing up the laundry, as he often claimed to do late at night. But the basement wasn't a place for a baby. It was cold, dim, silent. A place where no one would hear a sound. A place where no one would see. Amanda woke up suddenly. Something felt off. There was no loud noise. No cry for help, but something deep inside her pulled her from sleep, a mother's instinct screaming that something was wrong. She turned her head. Benji wasn't there. Panic flickered in her chest. Maybe he had fallen asleep on the couch. Maybe he had taken Emmaleigh downstairs, as he sometimes did, letting her sleep in her swing. Amanda climbed out of bed, her bare feet pressing against the cold floor. She moved quickly, checking the living room first. Empty. Her pulse quickened. She checked the bathroom. Nothing. Her heart pounded against her ribs, an unshakable feeling growing stronger by the second. And then she remembered. The basement. Benji had mentioned earlier that he would be doing laundry. A deep unease settled in her bones as she made her way to the basement door. It was open, just slightly. A sliver of darkness stretched beyond it. She placed her hand against the doorframe, her fingers trembling. Then she stepped inside. At first, it was just shapes. The basement was dim, the shadows playing tricks on her eyes. But as they adjusted, the scene before her came into focus. Benji, shirtless, kneeling, his jeans unbuttoned. And there, lying beneath him, was Emmaleigh, her tiny, fragile body completely bare. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. The room began to spin. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Benji didn't flinch, didn't panic. He looked up at her, his expression eerily calm. "I'm just wiping her off," he said. Amanda blinked. Her eyes darted to her daughter's face. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she had been trying to cry out. Her cheeks, her sweet baby's cheeks, were streaked with blood. The room collapsed around Amanda. Something deep inside her snapped. She lunged forward, her hands shaking, her heart thundering against her ribs. Why is she naked? Why do you have blood on you? Benji just stared. No fear. No remorse. No explanation. That was the moment Amanda knew. She snatched Emmaleigh into her arms, gasping at the unnatural coldness of her daughter's skin. Her baby, her fighter, her little warrior, was limp, unresponsive. And in that instant, Amanda lost control. Her hand flew across Benji's face with such force that it echoed through the basement. What did you do? Benji barely reacted, but Amanda couldn't stop screaming. Her hands fumbled for her phone. Her fingers trembled so violently she almost dropped it. She hit 911, and as soon as the call connected, her voice cracked with hysteria. My daughter is bleeding. From down there. Her words poured out in a mix of sobs and rage, raw and unfiltered. In the background, Benji finally moved. He buttoned his pants. But it was too late. Because the nightmare was already real. The dispatcher barely had time to respond before Amanda's screams filled the line. I think he raped her. She wasn't just saying the words. She was choking on them, gasping between sobs as her world crumbled in real time. Her hands clutched Emmaleig's tiny, lifeless body, but the warmth was gone. The baby's skin was ice cold, her face drained of color. Amanda could hear her own screams bouncing off the basement walls, but they didn't sound like her own. They were raw, animalistic, pure agony. Benji just stood there. Not panicked. Not remorseful. Just there. What the fuck did you do to her? She shrieked, her voice a violent tremor of rage and devastation. Benji didn't answer. He barely reacted. That's when Amanda lost control. With a surge of blind fury, she struck him, her palm landing hard against his face, her nails dragging across his skin. She wanted to tear him apart, to rip his flesh from his bones, to make him feel even an ounce of the horror he had inflicted. Emmaleigh let out a weak, gurgling sound. A sound so faint, so fragile, that Amanda's rage turned to terror in an instant. She couldn't waste another second. She ran, sprinting up the stairs, gripping Emmaleig's tiny, bloodied body against her chest. The phone nearly slipped from her hand as she fumbled it back to her ear. Hurry! She's not breathing right. She's freezing. Her voice cracked again, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The dispatcher was talking, asking her questions, but Amanda could barely process the words. The front door burst open. Flashing lights. Sirens. The first responders ran toward her, their faces shifting from controlled urgency to horror the second they saw what she was holding. Emmaleigh. Silent. Lifeless. One paramedic reached for the baby, but Amanda's grip tightened. She couldn't let go. She wasn't ready. Please help her, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper now. The paramedic pried Emmaleigh from her arms and rushed inside. Another officer turned toward Benji. Lift your shirt. Benji hesitated. No. Slowly he obeyed. And there it was. A dark red stain, smudged across his chest, his abdomen, his thighs. Not his blood. Benji muttered something under his breath, a feeble attempt at an explanation, but the officer wasn't listening. Because there was no explanation for this. The silence in that moment was deafening. And then, cuff him. 2 words. The beginning of the end. Please. Help her. Amanda screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. A paramedic rushed forward, carefully pulling Emmaleigh from her mother's arms. The moment they touched the baby's cold skin, their eyes flickered with something Amanda couldn't bear to acknowledge: fear. Because in their line of work, they knew. They had seen this before. And it never ended well. But they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. They laid Emmaleigh down on a stretcher, working against time, hands moving with trained urgency. One paramedic pressed tiny oxygen tubes against her nose, another checked for any faint sign of life. Stay with me, sweetheart, one of them whispered, his voice barely audible over Amanda's sobs. But there was no response. No cry. No movement. Only silence. A lifeless kind of silence. They pushed air into her fragile lungs, trying, desperately, to bring her back. But even as they worked, their eyes exchanged silent messages. Messages Amanda refused to see. This was beyond saving. But they had to try. The ambulance ride was a blur. Amanda sat in the front seat, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She clutched at her own chest as if trying to keep her heart from breaking apart. She kept turning back, trying to catch a glimpse of her daughter, but the view was blocked by the flurry of hands, wires, and machines. She could hear them calling out numbers, shouting medical terms she didn't understand. BP dropping. No response. We need to move faster. Each sentence was like a dagger to her chest. Is she okay? She finally screamed. Please, tell me she's okay. No one answered, because they didn't know how to tell her the truth. At the hospital, the emergency team was already waiting. The second the ambulance doors flew open, doctors and nurses swarmed around Emmaleigh. She was rushed through the double doors, disappearing into the bright white hallways of the trauma unit. Amanda tried to follow, but someone stopped her. You can't go in. What do you mean I can't go in? That's my baby. Let me in. But they couldn't. They needed space. She collapsed onto a chair in the waiting room, hands clutching her face, rocking back and forth. She could still feel Emmaleig's weight in her arms, still see her baby's bright eyes staring up at her from just the day before. She couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not to him. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like an eternity. Then the door opened. A doctor walked in, his face unreadable. His scrubs were stained. His gloves were off. Amanda stood up so fast the room spun. She's okay, right? A beat of silence. Then, a shake of the head. Amanda's knees gave out beneath her. No, no, no. She's strong. Doctor knelt beside her, his voice heavy, careful. We did everything we could. 3 inches. That was all it took. A 3-inch skull fracture had crushed Emmaleig's tiny brain. The internal bleeding was too much. The damage was irreversible. Her baby was gone. But her heart was still beating. Machines were keeping it going. Amanda barely understood what they were saying when they told her she had a choice to make. She knew. She had always known. Emmaleigh would never wake up. Would never say mommy again. Would never take another breath on her own. The machines were just delaying the inevitable. And so, on October 5, 2016, Amanda made the hardest decision of her life. She walked into that hospital room, her body hollow, her hands unsteady. She reached out, gently stroking Emmaleig's forehead. Mommy's here, baby, she whispered, pressing a trembling kiss to her daughter's cold skin. Her voice cracked as she spoke the last words she would ever say to her little girl. I love you. The machines were turned off. The room fell silent. And just like that, the little warrior, the baby who had fought so hard to live, took her final breath. From the moment paramedics rushed baby Emmaleigh to the hospital, investigators knew they were dealing with something beyond a tragic accident. This wasn't just a case of unexplained injuries. This was something deliberate, something monstrous. The evidence didn't just speak, it screamed. The basement told a horrifying story. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, on blankets, on Benji's clothes. Detectives obtained a warrant to seize his belongings. His pants? Stained. The waistband? Soaked with traces of blood. Even the inside of his pockets tested positive. And then there was his phone history. Between 2:52 a.m. and 3:17 a.m., the very hour Emmaleigh was being assaulted, Benji was searching for adult content. At 4:54 a.m., just 6 minutes before Amanda found them in the basement, he made a 9-second call to a contact labeled home. Who was he calling? And what? Investigators dug deeper. They found text messages. One sent to his brother. Understood, isn't fine, but don't worry. I'll be dead soon. A chilling confession. A man who knew the walls were closing in. But Benji wasn't dead. He was arrested. And when officers confronted him, his story kept changing.
I don't know how I could deny it if I don't remember. I wouldn't feel comfortable denying it, but...
First, he said he didn't remember anything. Then he said he blacked out. Then he said maybe he fell asleep. Then he said he had no idea how Emmaleigh got hurt. Every version contradicted the last. But the one thing he never said? I tried to help her. Because he didn't. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the horror had spread far beyond Ripley, West Virginia. People demanded justice. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted the scene in excruciating detail. The basement, the injuries, the DNA, the blatant cover-up. And then they played it. Her voice, shaking, screaming, desperate, echoed through the courtroom. What did you do? What did you do to her? She had fought for her baby's life. But Benji? He had only fought to save himself. And then came the autopsy report. The word skull fracture rang through the courtroom like a hammer hitting concrete. A 3-inch break in her tiny skull. Multiple blunt force injuries. And then the unspeakable. Emmaleig's injuries were consistent with violent, prolonged sexual assault. The kind of trauma so severe, even hardened investigators struggled to listen. Benji's lawyer did everything possible to shift the blame. There are gaps in the evidence. He was too drunk to remember. There are other possibilities. But there weren't. The jury wasn't buying it. And neither was the public. Outside the courthouse, thousands of people signed a petition calling for Benji to be executed. The outrage was overwhelming. After 5 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours. Then the verdict. Guilty. 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 First-degree murder. Child abuse resulting in death. Sexual assault by a guardian. Benji sat motionless. Then, for the first time in the entire trial, he cried. Not for Emmaleigh. Not for Amanda. Not for the life he destroyed. He cried for himself. But there would be no mercy. His sentence? Life in prison, plus 40 years. Every charge consecutive. No parole. No escape. No second chances. In the wake of the trial, West Virginia passed Emmaleig's law, ensuring harsher penalties for child abusers. A victory. But no law could bring her back. Emmaleigh should have grown up. She should have had birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. Instead, she became a name on a courtroom docket. A victim of the man her mother thought she could trust. Benji Taylor took everything from her. And now, behind prison walls, he will have nothing left. In the days following Emmaleigh Barringer's death, a wave of grief and outrage swept through the community. It was the kind of tragedy that left people struggling to find the right words, because there were none. What had happened to this innocent baby girl was beyond comprehension, beyond reason. At the vigil held in Pasadena, Maryland, candlelight flickered in the darkness as a crowd of mourners stood together, faces wet with silent tears. They weren't just grieving for Emmaleigh. They were grieving for every child failed by a world that allows monsters to walk among us unnoticed. Her name was printed on t-shirts, held up on signs, whispered in prayers. Some people spoke. Others couldn't. The weight of it all was too much. The community wanted justice. But justice, in a case like this, feels like an empty word. No prison sentence could undo what had been done. No punishment could bring Emmaleigh back. And yet, there was one thing they could do: make sure this never happened again. The outrage reached beyond West Virginia. Across the country, thousands of people signed a petition demanding the death penalty for Benjamin Taylor. The signatures poured in by the hour, a collective scream from a public that had seen enough evil, enough suffering. The petition was eventually taken down, but the message was clear. People were angry. The justice system moved swiftly. Benjamin Taylor was sentenced to life in prison. No parole. No second chances. No freedom. He would spend every remaining day in a cell, forced to live with what he had done. But the case didn't just end with a conviction. It became a turning point. In April 2017, West Virginia Governor Jim Justice signed Emmaleig's law, a measure that doubled the penalties for child abuse resulting in death. Before the law, the maximum sentence was 40 years. Now it was 80. It was a step forward, but for Amanda Adkins, for Emmaleig's family, no law could ever fill the emptiness left behind. Amanda had to wake up every morning knowing her baby girl was gone. She had to live with the memories, the way Emmaleigh used to smile when she reached for her, the way she had just started babbling, the way she had only taken her first steps a short time before she was taken away forever. The house felt different without her. Too quiet, too empty. She had loved a man she thought was safe. She had trusted him with her child. And in return, he had stolen everything. To this day, people still remember Emmaleigh. Her name still lingers in online forums, in news reports, in the hearts of those who followed her case. Strangers who never met her still visit her grave. They still bring flowers, stuffed animals, small tokens of love for a little girl who never got to grow up. Because Emmaleigh Barringer was more than just a victim. She was a baby, a child who deserved bedtime stories and birthday parties. A little girl who should have been playing with her siblings, blowing out candles, opening presents, and growing up surrounded by love. Instead, she became a symbol, a painful reminder of the evil that exists in this world and the responsibility we all share to protect the innocent. Her story is not one to be forgotten. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, as you tuck your children into bed, as you listen to their laughter, their small voices calling for you, remember Emmaleigh. And remember that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear a familiar face. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they are invited into our homes. Let Emmaleigh's story be the reason we never let our guard down. And may we never stop fighting for justice, for protection, and for the children who can't fight for themselves. If this case touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let's make sure Emmaleig's story is never forgotten. And if you want to hear more true crime cases that need to be told, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching Crime of Passion. Stay safe.